9 October 1946. Essen. British zone of occupation. A clerk named Carl M., age 33, sits at a desk in a requisitioned schoolhouse and writes a sentence that would not be spoken aloud on that street. He writes, "We are rebuilding with borrowed cigarettes and borrowed memories, and the price for both is silence." His handwriting is small. His pencil is British Army issue. The window rattles in the wind because the panes were blown out last March and replaced with whatever glass could be scavenged. The people outside are women with bent backs and scarves tied tight against the dust. Trümmerfrauen. Rubble women. They lift bricks from piles as tall as houses and pass them hand to hand like buckets at a fire. He writes the sentence twice. He puts the notebook away when the municipal officer passes by. The mathematics of food come first. The arithmetic of hunger is exact. On 24 May 1945, the British military government set civilian rations in the Ruhr at 1,500 calories per day. The calories were ration cards stamped with dates and categories. Adults, heavy laborers, nursing mothers, a loaf of bread that crumbled into grey dust, the potatoes that sprouted eyes in the pantry. On 23 November 1946, British occupation reports note that actual availability had dropped to 1,000 calories in some districts. Reports of edema and fainting in tram lines, the notes say. In Weringhausen and Cray, people dig for coal from the dead seams and come up coughing black. Cigarettes become currency when money stops meaning anything. In the ruins of Duisburg, a carton of Chesterfields can buy 10 kilos of rye flour or a good pair of shoes. Cigarettes are measured, counted, smoked, traded, hidden. Cigarette economy, an Allied intelligence summary calls it, the mathematics of goods. 1 US camel equals 2. Schnapps plus 1 hour on a bicycle generator. Out of such equations, a market emerges and a city survives the winter. Carl moves between tables in the schoolhouse and counts forms. The British call them Fragebogen, questionnaires, sheets with 131 questions printed in small, dense type. Were you a member of the party? After what date? Did you attend courses? What was your rank? Did you contribute to Nazi organizations? Did you give donations? Were you ever present at executions? Did you employ foreign workers? If yes, how many? What nationalities? How were they housed? He looks at the questions with a bureaucrat's eye. The questions are designed to classify, sort, assign. They look like what they are, the structural tools for dismantling one state apparatus and building another quickly. The British administrators want to keep trains running and water flowing, and to do so they need Germans who know the timetables and pipes. He fills out his own questionnaire on 2 December 1946. He lists 1937 as the year he joined the party. He writes Mitläufer later in a different hand, on a different line, at a different time, when he is told what the possible categories are: Hauptschuldig major offenders, belastet offenders, minder belastet lesser offenders, Mitläufer followers, Orschel offenders, unlastet exonerated. He writes in a restrained tone. Employed as a clerk at the Stolberg Works, Essen, Payroll Department, 1939-45. No political office held. He does not mention what he signed on 14 April 1942. That date is recorded in a different archive. The factory ledger shows the entry: deduction of 3.0 RM from wages of Polish worker Jan K., badge P4712, for absence of 4 hours. Ration coupons withheld for 7 days. It is filed under personnel measures. The handwriting is firm. It is his. On 19 March 1945, British troops enter Essen. The buildings are hulls. The Krupp works are ruins and smoking slag. In a British Army film, an officer looks into the camera and says, "There are children alive here who have never seen a chocolate bar." Curfews are posted on walls. No one on streets after 2,000 rund hours. No gatherings of more than 5 persons. Surrender of weapons required. The law is now printed in English and German. The first printed word people learn in the ruins is off-limits. The Allied military police declare non-fraternization. No hugging, no handshakes, no gifts. This formal purity cannot survive hunger. In April, the rule bends. In July, it is lifted. British soldiers give out chewing gum in exchange for smiles. Girls polish their boots in exchange for soap. We live by barter, someone writes in a diary later placed in the Stadtarchiv. We trade our shame to stay alive. This is the arithmetic of occupation, order imposed on a society that still speaks the previous language. Trucks move, railways open. Brigadier so-and-so signs a requisition for coal. Church bells ring when they return. In the same months, in the same city, the people you did not see during 1943 reappear. They are thin. They carry bundles. They are the displaced persons. DPs. They are Jews in uniforms sewn from blankets and shoes tied with wire. They are Poles, Ukrainians, Italians, French, Dutch, Russians, Belgians, an entire geography returning through the same holes through which it was dragged in. They gather in camps with names: Unnamassen, Essen-Kray, Gelsenkirchen-Bwer. UNRRO operates them. The barbed wire is still there, but the direction has changed. The wire now keeps Germans out. For the first time in years, I see a fence that protects us, a DP named Bella writes. This is a miracle that we must not trust. Karl avoids the DP camp fence. He must pass it sometimes on his way to work. He reads the signs and looks away. He has a job to do and a questionnaire to answer and a winter to survive. Denazification sweeps through spring 1947 with the logic of a paper storm. The Sprüchkammer hearings are held in assembly halls whose roofs are patched with tar. Panels of Germans adjudicate. The rooms smell of damp wool. People bring letters from priests and neighbors. Persolschein, they call them. Whitewash certificates. He never raised his arm, one says. He was always polite to foreign workers, says another. The mathematics of guilt is a series of columns: time, office, donation. The arithmetic of mercy and haste. Because if they purge the entire bureaucracy, nothing will function. If they purge nothing, nothing will change. They aim for a balance and miss and hit it at the same time. In his file, a British officer writes, "No evidence of serious wrongdoing beyond party membership." A neighbor testifies, he hid a radio and shared BBC News. A Polish man's name is not there. The Persolschein is stronger than the ledger. The room is overfull, the docket is long, and the judges are tired. On 10 August 1947, the Sprüchkammer declares Karl a Mitläufer. He is allowed to return to work after a probationary period. He brings his pencil case back to the office. The city fills with strangers who are not foreign. They are Germans from elsewhere. Expellees. Vertriebene. Sudeten Germans and Silesians and East Prussians by the millions. Their luggage is wooden boxes tied with twine. They arrive in trains that have no schedules. They arrive in the mathematics of displacement. 1 in 6 West Germans by 1947 is from somewhere else. The town registers them and posts notices, rooms to be requisitioned for resettlement. The locals bristle. The expellers bristle louder. "We lost our homes and now must pay rent to strangers," says a man from Brieg. "We lost our homes and now must share them," says a woman from Essen. The arithmetic of scarce rooms is a morality play performed on every staircase. Families split kitchens. A curtain divides a living room. "The windowsill is our compromise," a letter says. "We put the pot there and take turns." Out of this friction, a new set of hatreds emerges and is folded into the old ones. The politics that will define a generation grow out of these shared hallways. The hunger winter of 1946-47 breaks something. The Rhine freezes. Coal is rationed to 4 hours of heat per day, then less. People ride trains to the countryside on Hamsterfahrten, food foraging trips. They carry coats and lamps to trade for rye and fat. In March, a school in Bochum collapses after a thaw. The bricks had been pilfered from its own walls to heat stoves. Allied occupation reports state dryly, potential for disturbances. They respond with shipments. CA pack. They are tied with string and filled with things that taste like future: spam, raisins, powdered milk. Marshall Plan pallet crates appear in summer 1948 with stenciled letters and a photograph taken at the dock, men with muscles lifting boxes labeled flour. The currency reform arrives on 20 June 1948. Old Reichsmarks become scrap. New Deutschemark notes appear overnight. On the day before the reform, shop windows are empty. On the day after, they are full. The mathematics of money snaps back. A pound of butter now has a price again that means something, and the grey market shrinks like a burned wound. Karl records the change with a bureaucrat's wonder. People are working. The tram is on time for the first time since 1942, he writes on 24 June. He reports receipts in the ledger, and the numbers begin to add instead of subtract. That is how hope feels, like a column that balances. He is called back to the Stolberg Works, which now operate under trusteeship. The machines are repaired. The warped belts are replaced. The smell of oil returns. Men in suits who kept their heads down are placed in charge because they have the keys. Colonel so-and-so of the British Control Commission shakes hands with them for the newspaper photographer. Behind the handshake is an unspoken bargain. We need you to rebuild this. You need us to sign papers that say you were in error, but forgivable. The Cold War enters through a calendar. Berlin is blockaded on 24 June 1948. The airlift begins. The planes fly over Essen and drop down into Tempelhof. We saw them. We counted them like we counted calories, a boy named Helmut says in an oral history recorded in 1979. The mathematics of air tonnage occupies the headlines. The mathematics of guilt moves to page 4. The denazification offices are consolidated, then reduced. The files that are not closed are placed on shelves and later sent to archives. The Sprüchkammern shut down in 1950. The new parliament in Bonn passes the 131er Gazettes in 1951, reintegrating civil servants who had been removed. The personnel doors open wider. The war is not forgotten. It is placed behind glass. Karl is not a major offender. He does not even look like one. He is an office man. He has a wife who lines up for lettuce and a son who fell in 44 and a daughter who is learning to type. He has a small scar on his wrist from a machine accident in 1938, which he shows when asked where he was when politics happened. Working, he says. We all worked. In his version, that explains and excuses everything. He has a drawer of photographs. There is one from 1942 of an entrance gate at the factory. The sign says, in black letters on white metal, foreign workers must use gate 3. He does not write about the way the men with the pea-patch on their jackets were driven in a column to that gate. He told himself then that he wasn't the one with the baton. He tells himself now that the men might have forgotten his face. He is wrong. Memory stores what the lattice of power needs it to store. In August 1945, when he first returned to the factory to retrieve an ink blotter, he walked past the camp where the Polish workers had been housed. The barracks were empty. The bunk beds were stripped. The yard stank of tar. There was a chalk mark on a wall that said "Konni Ek" in a hand that did not speak German. He looked at it and did not stop to ask what the word meant. There are reports from that time that sit in file folders. One is from the British Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, dated 12 December 1945, on forced labour at industrial plants in the Ruhr. It lists numbers. In 1944, 9 million foreign workers in Germany. Poles represented 2 million of them. Gastarbeiter were paid minimal wages, their ration cards marked with circles that made them hungry. The report's language is dry. Work was performed under guard. Punishments administered for tardiness and absence were recorded as internal. These words are gentle compared to what occurred, but they are as close as official reports came to name it in that year. Past the DP camps, past denazification, past the freeze and thaw of Berlin, the Wirtschaftswunder arrives like a myth finally given body. The stores fill. The factories hum. A line of cars emerges on the autobahn where sheep grazed among potholes in 1947. By 1953, unemployment has fallen. Magazine photographs show a woman at a counter buying oranges with a smile that weakly illustrated wants to be the face of the Republic. "We are not broke anymore," the caption says. Marshall Plan shipments brought wheat and machinery, but it was the arithmetic of care at home that clicked into a 1950s tempo. The rubble is moved to the edge of town, and in its place rises a new housing block, straight, clean, monotone. The kitchen in it is small and electric. It has an oven with a dial and a timer. The hot water comes when asked. A woman declares in a letter, "This feels like a promise kept." She means it. But the promise has a ledger. The ledger shows names that do not appear on monuments. The factory that now makes turbine blades once made casings for bombs. The paymaster who now counts hours counted ration deductions for Poles. The foreman who now lectures apprentices about safety used to say, "The Poles are slow because they are slow people," and recorded fines with a heavy penal, and recorded fines with a heavy pen. The mathematics of continuity is less photogenic than the new toasters, but it is more faithful to how societies survive. In one of the new schools, a teacher shows children a book with a paragraph on the recent past. The paragraph says, "Under the dictatorship, many suffered. We must never let such a dictatorship happen again." The paragraph has no names and one example, bombings. A little boy raises his hand. He says, "The sirens are scary." The classmates nod. In the schoolyard, their father's stories are of firestorms and listening for engines in the night and waking to empty lots. They are true stories, assembled into a memory that emphasizes what was done to them, not what was done for them and against others in their name. The arithmetic of pedagogy, what you emphasize, shapes what survives. Expellee organizations mount displays. They bring maps. They bring costumes. They bring photographs of harvests in East Prussia and weddings in Sudeten villages, and of columns of refugees in winter. There are speeches. "We have a right to our homeland," a poster says at the annual Tag der Heimat. Politicians appear and nod. The arithmetic of votes and empathy is tangible. These are citizens now, and they deserve to be heard. The ledger of suffering is large enough to accommodate many entries, but it cannot be balanced without confronting whose entries are missing. In 1957, the factory orders a new set of milling machines. The old ones creaked because a war had run through them, as surely as it ran through grey matter in 100,000 skulls. The foreman overseeing the installation is named Hans G. He, was a cap-wearing supervisor of foreign workers in 1943. He has a trimmed mustache. His Spruchkammer classification was minder belastet. He brought 2 Perselschein from a pastor and a shop owner. He was advised by a lawyer to be exact but not expansive. He named the punishments he administered necessary discipline. In 1960, he gets a bonus for reducing the rate of broken cutters by 12%. This is the mathematics of success. It is also a poem about America's grains transformed into German wages and then into silence. On a winter day in 1964, a man steps off a train at Essen Hauptbahnhof with a suitcase wrapped in rope. He is from Poland. His papers are rare, difficult, and obtained through an agency correspondent to a Catholic charity that arranges seasonal labor permits for neighboring coalfields and the heavy industry hungry for workers. There is no bilateral labor agreement with Poland. The files of the Federal Labor Office will categorize him as a special case. In his notebook, he writes a line as his train slows past the old factory wall. He writes, 1964, Ruhr Valley. I step off the train from Poland and I recognize a factory gate from 1942. Back then they called me slave labor. Now the sign says, guest. The machines have not aged. Only we have. His name is Jan K. He is 45. In 1942, he wore a patch with a white P on his jacket and stood in a line in a courtyard, trying not to cough because coughing was punished. He learned enough German to understand orders. He learned the smell of hot oil and warm bread, distinct and cruel. He learned the arithmetic of rations per day and fines per hour, and he learned what it meant to be called nothing when you had a name. He remembers a clerk who did not look up. In 1964, the word on his work permit is Gastarbeiter, guest worker. There are many guest workers in that decade. They came from Italy in 1955, from Spain and Greece in 1960, from Turkey in 1961, from Morocco in 1963, from Portugal in 1963, from Portugal in 1964, and from Yugoslavia in 1968. They come because the factory floors are clean, and the machines turn, and after the war the men who would have turned them died or aged, and because there are few like Jan from Poland because the arithmetic of diplomatic recognition has its own tyranny. West Germany does not have relations with Poland. The Holstein Doctrine is a fence that catches many. But there are exceptions in a world of rules. This is one. The paperwork is stamped, the letters are copied, and he arrives. The city he steps into is not the one he left, but it is not different enough that he does not know where to turn. The stations have clocks and the trams hum. The men in suits smoke filtered cigarettes. Children carry school bags. A church that was a cavitated shell is now a sharp spire with bells. He takes a room in a Heim on Oststrasse with 12 other men. Metal bunk beds, a green table, posters in 3 languages. The kitchen has regulations pinned to a cork board. No noise after 2000 trend. No women in rooms. No cooking on hot plates. The rent is deducted from wages. The meals are served at fixed times. Coffee is ersatz and the bread is whole. A woman named Frau M. runs the place with a kindness that is a system of napkins and the right tone. He goes to the factory on his second day. He walks past the gate he wrote about and sees a sign in 4 languages. He sees men in helmets and men in caps. He sees a clock with hands lighted by radium. He checks his name on a roster. It is there now, spelled correctly. He stands in a group of men with black hair and dark eyes, and he is lighter and older. He is assigned to milling, second shift. On his 3rd day, he sees the man from the office. The man from the office does not look up. Carl looks at the new hires as entries on a ledger. He calculates the ratio of throughput per hour to wages plus overhead. He calculates bonuses. He calculates breakage. If he notices the man with the same name as the one from the 1942 ledger, it is as a disturbance in the air rather than a fact. He is skilled at avoiding facts that cause disturbance. He has practiced. When he does glance up and sees the eyes look back, there is an impact in his chest. It is a recognition without a term in his native tongue that he will say to himself, He names it afterwards as coincidence and replaces the word when it proves too hard with another, easier one, error. He writes on a card, "Production target increased by 3% from March." He walks on. The mathematics of reparations is a web that stretches over these men and their tools. The West German federal compensation law, Bundesentschädigungsgesetz, BEG, enacted in the 1950s, allows for payments to victims of persecution, primarily in the West, and those who can document persecution as defined by the law. Many categories of victims are excluded. Slave laborers from Eastern Europe are not compensated. The FRG says the question of reparations to the East is tied to a final peace treaty. Poland received some machinery from the Soviet-administered reparations that the East took. But the men who labored in places like this factory are names on lists kept in distant ministries and family tables and in their own bones. Jan applies because he has heard from a man in his Heim that something is possible. He fills out a form. He writes his story on lined paper with poor grammar but a perfect chronology. He attaches 2 letters signed by the priest in his village and by a fellow former worker in Bydgoszcz. He notes his badge number in the camp and the wage rates paid and withheld. He submits the packet to an address in Bonn with a stamp. In late 1964, he receives a letter that says, "Not within the scope of the law." The sentence is in an impersonal voice. It is signed by a name in a script that looks like the one that deducted pennies for bread in 1942. He puts the letter in his suitcase and does not write about it in his notebook. He works overtime. He wires money home. The arithmetic of remittances is a line on a paper at a currency exchange, 200 DM to zloty converted, at the agreed rate that makes 3 coats for his children and pays for a new tile stove. He counts the hours in the second shift, the chill air at 2200 when he walks home under white bulbs, the Sundays when he sits on a bench and smokes and watches men in good coats walk women with scarves to church. He goes to Mass sometimes with a group of Italians who cross themselves faster. He keeps his story inside his chest because he has learned that the air here does not accept this smoke. Inside the factory, men like Hans G. remember and do not. He says once in the break room to another foreman, "We used to have Poles here. They were quick, hard-working." He says it like a compliment applied to tools. He does not mention the stick. He does not remember a name. If he does not say it out loud. His salary is good. His boy is an apprentice. He thinks this is how it should be. His boy is an apprentice. The other workers are not unkind. They joke. They exchange cigarettes. A man from Assel shows Jan how to clean a cutter with a brush so it does not dull. A Turkish man shows him how to cook beans with onions in the Heim kitchen, so that the smell reminds him of home in a world where everything else smells like oil and rain. They create a community out of the blankness the word guest demands. Guests know when to leave. Workers know when to stay. Karl reads newspapers that say "Wonder" in large letters. He reads about the wall in Berlin, the one the East built in 1961. He reads about the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in 1961. He reads about the Auschwitz trials in Frankfurt in 1963. He reads that an SS man who once lived 2 streets away provided testimony about selections. He folds the newspaper and puts it in the wastebasket with a careful hand. He tells himself that this is not about him. He says to his wife, "They are looking for big fish." He says to himself, "Do not be a small fish that swims close to the surface." He knows what he has signed. He knows who he was and is. Schoolbooks in 1964 still show children what is safe to show. A chapter on air raid shelters, a picture of a woman with a bucket, a paragraph on Hitler that reads like a weather report. Vandalism and violence exist, but in the past. The boys in the courtyard kick a ball made of leather and look toward the gate when the shift ends to see their fathers walk out. Some of those fathers walked out of different gates in different years and look at other boys, and inside their heads are rooms where they do not go because they cannot, or because the rent there is unbearable. If you read the Bundesarchiv records of the period, you find that in 1964, the Federal Employment Office published a pamphlet on integrating foreign workers. It says, "The guest workers are temporary helpers who support our economy. They bring gifts and take home wages. They enrich our culture with diversity." It is a polite document. It speaks the language of welcome wrapped around a clock that ticks toward a departure date. A letter in a different archive tells another story. It is from a German worker to his mother. "We have men now from Turkey, from Italy, and a man with a Polish face. They make noise on Sundays. The street smells different. The women say nothing but watch. I do not mind them. They work. I remember when the British came. I remember when the Russians were at the river. I remember the Polish boys in 1942. I do not know what to say when I see the one now. The past is too loud to speak." It fills your mouth. Jan writes in his notebook the first week. The factory whistles are the same. The second week, the machine sings the same song. I know each verse. The third week, I saw a man from the office. He did not look at me. Maybe he never looks at men. The fourth week, the winter is wet. The Heim smells of onions. I do not complain. I am not a slave, I am a guest. The difference is visible in my pockets. He keeps working. He falls into the schedule. He learns to step aside on the staircase when the foreman's boots come down. He was good at that step before. He picks up the rhythm like a muscle memory. He says to himself in Polish, "Kombinuj," that wartime word for improvised survival. He can find the cracks in systems and make them a path. In March, he discovers that his former overseer, Hans, prefers silence as a management technique. He asks in German, "Herr Meister, may I have a different pair of gloves?" The answer comes after 2 days and is no. He does not ask again. He tells himself he is saving words for when he writes a letter home. He writes to his wife, "I stood at the gate and remembered the snow in 1943. Now there is rain. I do not joke that rain is kinder. It is only water like snow. We are water and dust. This is not a sad letter. I am sending 50 marks. Buy sugar. Buy a new bowl." He tells no one in the Heim about the punishment ledger. He tells no one that he recognizes the gate because that would require explaining to men who believe the system is different that sometimes it is and sometimes it is identical except for the label on the door. When he lies in a bunk with his face turned toward the wall, he allows the sentence he wrote at the station to become a prayer. The machines have not aged. Only we have. In 1965, the city places a plaque at a bomb shelter entrance listing the number of civilians killed during a particular raid. It is neat, respectful, and correct. At the same time, a group of teenagers spray paint a swastika on a school wall and are caught and scolded. In a classroom, a teacher who was a soldier in the winter of 1943 uses the demonstration to say, "We do not do this now." He does not use the lesson to say, "We did this then." There are curriculum reforms. There are textbooks that change. The changes will have teeth in the late 1960s. In 1964, the teeth are still growing. At the factory in Essen, an inspector from the Federal Labor Office visits. He writes in his report, "The guest workers are housed adequately. The meals are sufficient. The supervision is orderly. No complaints." He writes what inspectors write if nothing forces them to say something else. He does not see the man who hovers outside the office door and then walks away because he does not want to shake a hand that once pressed a rubber stamp on a form that took food out of his mouth. In the break room, the radio reports on Chancellor Erhard's remarks about prosperity. Wohlstand für alle, he says. Prosperity for all. Men nod. A man says, I have a television now. Another says, my wife bought a refrigerator. Jean says nothing. In his pocket is a letter of rejection from an office in Bonn. In his heart is a list that does not fit in any official category. In 1966, a recession hits. Uncertainty is another mathematics. The factory orders fewer machines. Overtime shrinks. Rumors begin. The talk is of rotation and of sending men back at the end of contracts. The word guest shows its other face. A Turkish worker says, we will see. An Italian says, I will stay. A German says, I will stay. A German says, it is better to have the job than to pay benefits. The ledger flips a page. That year, Karl turns 53. He has a doctor's note that his blood pressure is too high. He has a Porsche brochure in a desk drawer with a thumbprint on it. He does not own one. He can imagine one. He buys a sewing machine for his wife instead. In a filing cabinet in the City Hall, there is an application for space from the local chapter of an expellee organization, the Heimatvertriebene Association. They want to build a larger monument to the lost East. The letter is polite and passionate. The mayor writes back with the calculus of budgetary constraints. He offers a smaller space. They accept with gratitude. On the day of the ceremony, the speeches are about suffering and resilience. An old woman weeps. A young man looks at his watch. A guest worker passes by and does not understand the words, but understands the tone, the sound humans make when they talk about displacement and demand it be recognized. He nods. He does not stay. When the student movement erupts in 1968, the slogans in Berlin reach the pages of the Essen papers. Unter den Talleren, Muff von 1,000 Jahren, the students say, under the robes, the mustiness of 1,000 years. They speak of a generational rupture, of confronting what their parents did and did not do. In the Ruhr, it is less vivid than in Berlin. The locomotive of the economy does not like to stop for conversation. But a few sons ask their fathers about 1933, 1938, 1938, 1942. Some priests write sermons about the weight of the past. The Nazi past hardens into a political terrain in which left and right claim different truths. The factories roar on. A man on a milling machine hears a radio segment about a trial in Frankfurt and leans closer to the tool because the world he can control is an arc of steel. In 1970, Willy Brandt kneels in Warsaw. His coat is black and the ground is cold. He kneels at the monument to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In living rooms and factory break rooms across the Republic, people stop and watch and think. He shouldn't have done that, a man says. He finally did that, a woman says. Both sentences are true for someone. The Treaty of Warsaw follows. Recognition of territorial changes. A new chapter turns. The files in Bonn begin to show new categories of contact with the East. But compensation for forced labor is not it. The ledger of wrongdoing says, later. Jan watches the kneeling on a small television in the Heim. He cries because he has not cried in years. Then he stands and goes to work. He writes to his wife. He knelt. A man in a good coat. It is something that is allowed. It is something that will not buy a bowl. The Ostpolitik of the 1970s creates corridors for families to meet who were separated by concrete and by doctrine. It does not reopen the past for those whose past has a German stamp on it. The 1973 Unverbestop stops recruitment of foreign labor. The men in the Heim are told they can stay in the meantime. Some bring families. Writing on walls changes from Turkish surnames to children's drawings. A woman from Izmir buys apples at a market in steel and says to another woman, "We are neighbors now." She has a right to say this. She pays rent. She takes her child to the doctor. She stands in the same tram. The school books change again. Now there are more pages. The photographs are less curated. Bergen-Belsen is named. The word Auschwitz is explained. The children stare at images of men in striped clothing behind wire and understand, at the foggy edges, that the wire they pass on the way to school once held different people on different sides. They ask in history class, "Where were our grandparents?" The room is quiet. The teacher answers, "Here." It is the right answer and it breaks something. That is good. Karl retires. He is given a fountain pen with his name on it and a handshake. He takes the bus home with a plant in a pot wrapped in foil. He puts the pen in the same drawer as the Porsche brochure and the photographs he does.